Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 405, and today's guest is Ed Jennings, CEO of Quickbase. The terms narrow and growth seem to contradict each other, yet in Ed's mind, the two concepts go hand in hand. Based on his experience, true scaling doesn't always mean adding new products or wildly expanding into new industries. However, it can be a huge challenge to say no to new opportunities when the goal is to increase revenue. But as Ed explains, the key to sustainable success is to look deeply at your core customer and double down on your core value. This focus is what helps you win and retain customers, a factor often overlooked but insanely important for long-term growth. Quickbase is the AI operations platform used by more than 12,000 organizations worldwide to transform ordinary work into extraordinary impact. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Ed's unique background story, including his years growing up in the Midwest and then living in Japan after college, his journey into the tech industry, and building his career into executive leadership roles at major companies like PTC, ADP, Veracode, and Mimecast. All the details on Quickbase and its platform, plus lots of information about the company's culture, career advice for moving your way up to a CEO role, insights on hiring executives, and so much more. Okay, quick side note, is your company hiring? If the answer is yes, then what are you doing to build up your company's employment brand? If you don't have a content strategy, then it is highly likely that you're just flying under the radar. The good news is that we can help. A subscription to VentureFizz includes a content playbook for sharing all the details on your company, people, and culture. We leverage all formats of storytelling to include video, podcasting, employee profiles, and more. Reach out to info@venturefizz.com to get the details. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Ed. Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
Keith, good to see you again. How you been?
I've been great. Yeah, we did a short video. We call them Discover videos. Like, I think it was 3 years ago. I was looking at it before jumping on here, and I'm like, wow, a lot has happened since then. So I was excited to interview you for this podcast because there's a lot to talk about Quickbase, of course, but there's also your professional journey that I was really excited about. We're going to go into the weeds of that, but the upshot of what I took out of it was you have had a tremendous level of success and repeat success of scaling companies to a point where there was some type of outcome or exit. So it made me wonder, I'm like, what is there a playbook? What are the commonalities that you use for scaling companies? And, this is something I wanted to do initially just to kind of kick off the conversation.
Yeah, no, I love the question. I appreciate the question. I'd say this, and I know so much of your audience are founders, and I mean, really at the core of starting a company, and I could say maybe it's sort of knowing where I play best. And I'd done a startup, and I remember, 4 or 5 years, peanut butter and jelly, it's countless hours, 996, whatever they call them these days. And I was nervous. Yeah. I was so nervous. And we had 4 young kids at the time. So my wife at one point, she's like, okay, where is this going?
What are you doing to me?
What are you doing? And so I have tremendous respect for people that go through that journey. And maybe that's when I realized maybe my place and where I could add more value is at that next step where maybe, and typically it is starting to work with a founder, and I partnered with them on several of the companies I've been part of. We bought a bunch of founder creative business. We bought 4 of them here at Quickbase in the last few years. And so, that's the hardest part. I'd say that I have more respect for the people that get that going. And then it's like, okay, they found some really interesting product. They found a product market dynamic and fit and a way to compete. And usually what like the great idea, like all that wrestling with the technology, all that wrestling with what people really want, there's another phase, which is like, okay, well, how do you do that times 4? How do you go from a couple salespeople to tens to hundreds of salespeople? How do you go from being in one country to maybe being in 10 or 15? How do you add your second product? How do you add your third product? Those are the kind of challenges that I usually can add value. And usually I like to, rack my brain over and build teams around. And so, but it all starts with the kernel has to be right, because none of the stuff that follows matters if the core isn't right. If they don't have great product, or they don't have great product market fit, or they haven't found a way to really compete, it all builds off of that.
So while you're evaluating a company to potentially join, what are the key things that you look at?
Well, it is, there's a lot of, well, actually, what I find a lot, and a lot of what, believe it or not, I think people think scaling is adding, and it's not. You can't really scale complexity is like sort of an expression I've heard in the past. Like the core has to be right. And if anything, a lot of times where I've get involved in a business, maybe it's 20 million or 30 million or 50 million. And a lot of times founders have amazing and huge visions, big visions. And a lot of times they've started to incrementally add other things and chase more and more ideas. And usually it's a process of scaling them back to maybe the core, maybe a little bit closer to the center where they originally were, and say, hey, there's no reason to add more products. Your core product, there's a great market for that. And because we're doing all these other things, we're getting not as competitive in the core. And so usually, believe it or not, when I'm working with founders, with either bottom or if I've joined that company, it's narrowing back to what was essential and what was like most unique about what they had done. And so that exercise happened time and again.
And that's great feedback because you're to your point. Yes, people think the opposite. It's like we got to do more products, more industries. And I think what we're going to talk about from my research with Quickbase is you did help narrow, and that's been tremendous success. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's rewind the clock. So where did you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah. Okay. I'm a Midwesterner, so I've got that kind of Wisconsin friendly sort of dynamic. And actually, ironically, I grew up big old Irish Catholic family. I'm the sixth of six kids, but
Wow,
I'm the
the baby.
36 of 36 first cousins. So I'm the baby of a big, huge family that my dad was a
Ah,
part of. So it
no
was
wonder why
fun.
you're so tough. You just got
Yeah.
beat up all the time growing up.
Oh, totally, totally. My grandmother had a farm, and so we'd always like do holidays out there, summertime and things like
Mhm.
that, and it was always mayhem. Everyone still talks about the farm. A lot of fun and just fun memories of going out there and having a lot of. And I still meet cousins all over. They're all over the place, and so it's always fun to
Mhm.
go to the city and catch up with some old family that way. So big Irish Catholic family in the Midwest.
Okay. And so what was the journey to Boston College like? Like why'd you go there? What did you study in English?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of that was I was went to Jesuit boys schools all the way through, and BC was a good one, and didn't get into the fancier ones. And now BC's fancy. I don't think they let me in anymore these days. But loved it, and actually had sort of one of those, and felt blessed for it, having now kids that are in and beyond college. To really just wrestle with, big thinking, big classic Western civ kind of, courses, theology and philosophy and these things. I was an English major just because it was interesting. And I know everyone's so pressured to do these really specific and quantitative, fields, but I think big thinking and big insights come from being able to sort of some of that background that I had. So I love that education. And then met my wife there. We actually met freshman year during orientation, believe it or not.
No way. That is
First day of
awesome.
school of college, and we've been blessed to be together ever since, and have four
Wow.
great kids, and eventually we lived all over the place, and we moved back to Boston maybe about 17 years ago. So
That's awesome. All
yeah.
right. So after college, when I learned about your journey after college, I was like, what? Wait. So let's talk about what you did after college, because I think it's a pretty unique story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's funny. I graduated. And I wanted to do a little adventure, and I figured money to do a big backpacking trip. I'd never been to Japan or China or Taiwan or any of those, Korea, etc. I said, well, I'll do a big backpacking trip, and so I did that. And what was supposed to be about a month, maybe, turned into be 2 years, and just ended up in Japan, and it was really exciting. And I remember, like, I met some folks there. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have a job. I probably had about a month's worth, like, because it's expensive. This was in the early 90s, and ended up landing a job teaching English. And then got an apartment, and then met some great friends. Studied karate. I studied their language diligently. I mean, I had an amazing experience, and I think and I remember leaving there. My last thing was we did a bike trip around the whole island of Honshu, which is their main island. So it was about a 2-week bike trip. And we were leaving. We lived in Kyushu, the southern island, Fukuoka, and we were leaving. And a buddy of mine, did this trip, went through those big gates. You've seen those torii gates that they have in Japan. And we totally high-fived it. And we're like, we did this. And we didn't know anybody. We didn't have any language experience. We didn't have jobs, but I think since it's changed how I think about risk. It's like I'm willing to throw myself deep in. I know a lot of your founders, they're doing, I mean, that is the ultimate act of like taking risk and jumping in. I think you have to. I think if you don't risk, you can't gain. And I think I got comfortable with it right out of school, and it started with that whole experience.
Yeah, I mean, just the language barrier, learning how to write, and I mean, it just to pull that off for a couple of years is really impressive. So, okay, so when at what point did you get involved more in the tech industry, kind of getting that career path going?
Yeah. So I finagled my way into a job at a Japanese company and back in the United States in San Francisco. So I could speak Japanese pretty well. Like I couldn't write it very well, but they didn't really totally get that until I started working there. That was a whole series of things. But I spent a couple years there, loved it, and they were trying to license a lot of U.S. technology, a lot of trying to create partnerships with U.S. software companies, and so we were helping a lot of just that like technology transfers for some more sort of fundamental technology, and then even just localizing software for the Japanese market, that kind of thing. One of the companies that we did a lot of work with was a company called Broderbund. It was a gaming company, and so they said, "Hey, we're trying to do all this expansion into Europe. You're doing all this international and localization and development for foreign market. Like, we'd love you to run this group." So I ended up just as a young person, just jumping in to Broderman, spent about 7 or so years there. I loved it. Just that whole explosion of, sort of gaming and consumer software. And they ended up selling the business to Mattel, but it was a great, really fundamental, experience.
And so that was almost like you were like running a business at that point, like early in your career. So that is kind of like your foundational blocks of what we're going to talk about here in the future.
It was, and I did that, did some of the localization stuff, which I think running a business is glorifying. It was pretty operational, pretty tactical. It was mostly translation. I did support the teams in the different regions across Europe. We were primarily focused on. But what I did move into, and what I do think is an amazing, it's sort of like what governor is the president, that path. I think
Hmm.
product management is an awesome foundation as people think about wanting to run their own company or start their own company, technology company in particular, because you think at the right altitude. You think about
Hmm.
all the fundamental challenges and fundamentally what problem are you solving and for whom and why is it better
Hmm.
than the alternatives? And you really wrestle with all the elements to make that real. And I say this to a lot of folks who are getting into technology and getting into software. Like, I think product management is an amazing path and foundational for leadership more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree anymore. I've got a strong affinity for product management. I actually run a product management group because I don't think there's enough going on for PMs in Boston. So 1,000% with you there. Okay, so you went back to B school, Kellogg, Northwestern, obviously Midwest again, which is good.
Yeah.
What'd you do post MBA?
Yeah, so this was sort of in the craze. I like probably a lot of people in 99, 2000 were swinging at startups. And so,
Hmm.
ended up going went through two in about 2 years. And I said, like, and again, like,
What were they though? I need
yeah,
details.
well, there was is like Commerce Quest was one of them. Another one was and that one was out in the west, was in the West Coast, and then one called Into Networks, which was here in Boston. That kind of moved us back, and Into was actually pretty interesting. I would say that people say that it was ahead of its time. What we were doing was virtualizing software to be used over broadband. So we virtualized games, and so you could take something like Adobe Photoshop and rent it. Like you didn't have to rebuild it. It wasn't a native web architecture. It was the classic. We did it for CAD software. We did it for complex gaming software. And so we would partner with the broadband carriers who were looking for like that kind of rich content to incite people to pay them what seemed like a fortune to get a broadband connection to their home. And so we work with cable companies primarily and software companies. And it was cool. It's just we got kind of washed out in the 99, 2000, just it was just it went from explosive expansion world to like everything collapsed on itself with its first technology boom.
And what was your role there?
I did it is partnerships. So business development, which was not corporate development, is more like partnerships with the cable companies, the MSOs. We did a couple DSL, tried partnerships because we were saying, hey, this is content. And then on the other hand, we would sign up software companies. So EA, Adobe, the companies that were saying they were kind of skeptical, but they were curious. Like, could we really rent software and will it fit over broadband? And so the technology itself was really sophisticated, candidly, because it was, again, virtualizing apps that were built for very low latency, and they're not expecting you to be over a broadband connection. And so it was a clever application, and there was interest. It was fun. We signed up a bunch, but it was just, I think, just again, the dot-com crash that kind of pulled us down with it.
But you eventually ended up at PTC, right?
I did. And that was a very formative. I mean, there's nothing that beats surrounding yourself by mentors and people that can really tell you about your craft, whatever that function is, tell you how to lead, just keep giving you opportunities to do more and more, make mistakes, have the courage to tell you screwed it up, give you the opportunity to fix it. Like that. That's tough to do sometimes in environments, like if they're too small, this was a great company, and it wasn't perfect. Like they had an amazing run, and then they got kind of squashed in I think we got up to about $1 billion. It came down to, can't remember the exact number, 740 million or something in the like 2000, 2001. And kudos to, Dick Harrison, that team, they themselves, it wasn't a new team that was brought in. They, while being public, brought it back up to, back to $1 billion, back to $1.2 billion and they've just kept going. And that was really cool to see that kind of corporate courage, that kind of leadership to lead through a really tough scenario. And so I think there 7-8 years and in a range of mostly in marketing, and a little bit, and they were trying to get into more and more sort of SMB e-commerce. That's when I first got exposed to more of that PLG. We had a couple products that we had acquired that they were trying to have less of a sort of a sales-led classic approach and more of a, what was the beginnings of PLG and sort of marketing driven and a more simple trialing experience and a sales follow approach. And it was fun because they were open to it. And I think it's been important for them in other categories they've gotten into. But yeah, and I still, that's in Boston, as you know, there's no bigger network than PTC.
I was going to say that I don't think PTC gets enough credit for the alumni that have gone off to do extraordinary things.
You should. Okay, so I'm loose. There's people that were there more at the beginning that are deeper into this than I am, but there's a whole PTC alumni network thing, and they get together, and they might even have a site where they circulate where people have moved on to, and it's amazing that the success that so many of those folks have had later, just after at PTC and then beyond.
Yeah, like I had friends, when I was first out of college that were in sales roles at PTC, and it was rigorous. But if you were successful, you went on to do amazing things and, leading sales at a software company or whatever they went on to do. It wasn't easy, but you learned a ton. And if you could thrive in that environment, you went off and did some wonderful things. So, okay, after PTC, what'd you do?
Well, then I had the opportunity to jump back in, and it was first to run sales and marketing for a startup. And, there's a little group called Copanion, and they had this notion of automating workflows, like people like working with wealth advisors, working with tax accountants, these kind of things. They spend all their time just trying to input data. Like you go to your tax accounting, one of the multiple examples, but you go with your stack of your K1s and your W-2 and your, various 1099s and stuff like that. And they had rooms full of young people that had great educations and spent their time keying in data. And it was this was just an early AI workflow tool. It identify what the document was. It would extract it from the scanned image. It would identify where that needs to go in the form. And we called it Gruntworks. And it was it was the product offering. And we sold it to one of the tax players. It was sort of a 0 to about 5 million. So it never got that big, but it was sort of in the spirit of AI, like automating stuff that nobody wants to do, but kind of had to be done. And it was a great first step in that direction. And it was fun. It was, but that was and where I have so much respect for the startups. Like I remember during tax season, it would be like 24/7 because these forms were mostly automated, not totally. And everything came at us in about a 2-month period or less. And so it just required us, we would scale up and have this whole operations to support and quality control and things like that. And I'm thinking at the time, like, okay, these startups, this is tough. This is tough work.
But this was your first CEO role. So for context, this is 2007 to 2010, and you're talking about early building blocks of AI software, right? So what did you learn over that stretch as your first role as a CEO?
Yeah. You know, that was probably when I started to break through to realize, like, earlier in your career, you succeed by being the smartest person in the room, and you realize, like, this is not the path to me leading a group of people and growing and really getting the most. It was transitioning from trying to be the center of the room to like trying to realize this is about orchestration. I'm not the first violin chair and the first oboe chair. I'm conducting and I'm keeping pace. I'm making sure we're all in concert with each other and orchestrating across the different folks. If the person in the first chair isn't working out right, like maybe there's a change there, but I'm not trying to be the best at everyone else's job. And that, I think anyone that goes into real leadership, that's a stage they have to learn it at some point in their career. And in some cases, people coming out of technical realms, it can be even harder because they got there by being great at whatever it was. If it was as a developer, as an architect, if it was as a sales leader, like they just, there's a salesperson and a sales leader. That's another one of those transitions. It's a hard one for folks to let go of what got them there and starting to say, like, I'm no longer the center of this story. I'm a participant. I'm an enabler. I'm an orchestrator.
I love that analogy. I've never heard that before. So the conductor of the orchestra with the first chair, because you're not going to be the best sales, best marketing, best, engineering leader. Like you need leaders to be, driving that overall team dynamics and hopefully hiring great people under them. So that's a great analogy.
It's funny. I
All right.
even had a mentor that even said that if you think you really are as a CEO better at the various functional jobs than those individuals, you might not have the right people. They should be better at those
Right.
roles. And yours
Yeah.
is about, again, the pace setting, the orchestration, the coordination, getting them all rowing in the same direction, but not necessarily your job to be the best at any one of those functions.
All right, so on to ADP, which so this was a software unit for the massive payroll provider. So what was that business all about?
Yeah, it was a business called Taxware, and it was a company they had bought. They went on a spree. A couple dozen companies that they had purchased in the sort of the years leading up to when I was there. This was one of them, and it was a decent sized business. And we sold to retailers, and it was the very sexy space of sales and use tax. And so, what basically
You know what?
most
I was part of my starting out my career. I was at KPMG in the state and local tax unit, and they used to talk about that stuff. And I was like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about, but I
Oh,
know
yeah, it's mind
it.
numbing. Let's be clear. But the reason why it's so complex is it's a very sneaky way for local folks to raise taxes and nobody really sees it. 'Cause it's not even it's not federal, it's not state, it's not even county, it's municipality. They get to determine how they tax, clothing or like high-end clothing differently than milk, than, electronics, and they're constantly changing this because 'cause they're playing these games and they're optimizing, and so therefore a retailer, a local retailer, a national retailer, an e-tailer, like, they've got a way to reconcile all this and then pay off those multiple municipalities and people in the mix. It actually is a messy problem and it's constantly changing. So
Mhm.
Taxware was great at it. But it was a pretty mature business when I was there. And they realized that we sold it ultimately to Vista Equity because they were doing something much bigger in the tax space. Um, Savos was the name, I believe, of the company they ultimately created that Taxware and others became a part of. And that's where I got to
Isn't that
meet.
Savos? Weren't they in Chicago? Is my memory
I think they're
correct?
based out of Chicago. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
And so got to know that combination happened later on down the line. Vista did that, so I didn't know that business as well. Uh, but it was good. It was good. That was the first time we got to really meet some of the PE folks and see what they're doing, and that's when they were really starting to take off. You know what I mean? In terms of it's been the last 10, 15 years that a lot of them like Vista and Thoma Bravo and others have really realized, wow, these are great assets. You can do so much with these. I mean, I'm getting ahead of us a little bit, but that was kind of my initial reaction meeting
Well,
those guys.
I was going to say, I'm glad you mentioned that because we're going to come back to Vista in due time here. So, and it's also interesting to see the progression of the scale of revenues. So, you took a startup from 0 to 5 million. ADP was a 200 million existing business, but now on to Veracode, which, according to your LinkedIn, was at 20 million when you joined. So meaningful revenue. But in 3.5 years, it grew to 80 million and eventually was acquired by CA. So you you were the CMO. Like what was the drivers of making Veracode to that, level of
That was,
success?
yeah, that I come back to that first principle of there has to be an amazing product, and ideally that, like, some of the core team and some of the principles that made that such. And so Christian Yu, a lot of the folks that were the core minds behind Veracode, which was application security testing. And they were, I mean, they had pictures back from when they were, I think maybe even teenagers in their young 20s in front of the Senate hearing committee about, "Hey, this thing called cyber is real. There's real risk here."
Chris Weissopel was on my podcast 4 years ago, and he talked in detail about that Senate hearing and how they are all like sitting there with all their funny, like, their code names or whatever they have. Like, so
Yeah.
yeah, like crazy.
So it was cool. I hadn't been in cyber, and that was and the industry was really just coming of age. Those guys had been there for a long time and really been, like a little bit like, telling people this is a real deal. And there's a couple big public profile, like high profile breaches that started just awaken the world on the risk level there. And so they had and I followed in, one of my mentors, he had been on my board at, sort of Copanion before, and then we sold that. And then he ended up running, running Veracode. And he said, listen, there's a really great little business, it's amazing tech, a great foundational team. And so, back to the idea, though, they were doing a lot of things for a lot of different people. Sort of, they had to find anyone who might want to secure an application. And what we really focused on was, hey, there's really sophisticated builders of sophisticated apps. And they typically are either at software companies themselves, or they're big financial institutions. I mean, a lot of the banks have much bigger development teams. Most people don't really realize that. Like JP Morgan, I think, is more developers than most software companies, maybe save like an Amazon, Google. Like, they're huge
Right.
in terms of thousands and thousands of folks. And they're technology companies at the core. And so we're like, we're not boiling the ocean. There's 1,200 companies that really matter, that need this level of sophistication, application security testing. We serve that market uniquely well. And so that was that growth through focus. And there's great talent there. And I think that's also where I learned from Bob, like, if you step into an existing business, the founders have created the culture. They've created, like, you want to keep them there. You want to keep them flourishing in a new environment. And I think that's probably one of the things that I don't know. I think most PEs get this as well. Like, it's a much better business when the people that are the heart of it, they have to give up certain things, how you might grow the go-to-market, how you might think about expansion, but the kernel of that technology, and the concept, and even just the credibility in a market like cyber, they want those founders around. They're Chris Weissopel used to keep a suit in the closet because in any given day they'd call him into an interview because there'd be a breach, and he knew more about this stuff than anybody. And great partnership, and a great business. And they went on to do a bunch of other things. They got bought 3 or 4 times, after I left. I mean, like, multiple PEs traded it, and CA and Brocade, and then Tomo Bravo, TA. I mean, it's been through a lot.
Wow. Yeah. So what did you learn as, a CMO for this type of company?
Um, it's I learned a lot about cyber as a space, which I still think is an amazing market. It's interesting. I didn't know, like, a lot of times IT, it's you just prove the value. And and IT even now feels more about just the dollars, and especially maybe in this current environment. It's just, what's cheaper? Can we consolidate? I don't care if the users like that better than this one. That feels that way. Cyber feels still like it's grounded in trust. Like, the CISOs and CIOs who make these choices know they're going to be in a terrible situation. Like, they've all gone through it. It's inevitable. It's just how bad and how much can it be contained. But incidents are very real, and usually on a somewhat regular basis. So their choice of partners are, how do you build trust as somebody like a Veracode or a Mimecast? Because that's how they make their choices. Of course, your technology has to meet requirements and be defensible in terms of alternatives. And of course, you have to have value prop that matches sort of what you're charging them. But building a brand in that market, like, it's building trust in that market, and relationships are real. It's still, I think that's probably those ones that PLG and some of these, like, less human connections are probably going to be less effective in that market because of that trust requirement. So that was a lot of our brand building. Even our brand, like we came with this thing, was abstract, but this notion of now you've got a monster in your corner, because they all felt like they were up against this like intractable problem, and they needed to feel their vendors like were actually in it with them, and they were going to help them figure this out and not avoid it. It was going to happen to them, but mitigate and get through it when it did.
All right. You mentioned Mimecast. So off to Mimecast as chief operating officer, which according to LinkedIn, you joined when they were 80 million, and then that scaled to 400 million in the 4 years you were there. So, just another, echelon of growth.
There again, such a great founding team. So I still I think back of so many of the companies, and Peter Bauer, the founder and CEO, had a line about he wanted this to be the place where people like learn the most of any place in their career and grew the most. He was very deliberate about that, and I think it just set up such this open culture. And even if you came in like myself as a newbie, or if you've been there for 10 years with them from the beginning, like it was a great environment and very global environment. I mean, North America became the biggest market, but it wasn't originally. It was a UK based company and founded by South Africans. So like just a very fun and distributed environment. But that was one where they had just taken on money. And as a founder, some of that was, hey, you're an amazing technical mind. You've got great vision. We do want you to augment your leadership with more operating experience and with more rigor around how we think about building brand and how we think about growing a sales force and moving into other regions and acquiring and building subsequent products. And so that was where a lot of it was. But there again, it was a matter of focusing, because there was Peter had this notion of the world's information bank. Like through email, there's a corporate history. There's so much information. But it's unstructured in this complex environment. But and we did email archiving and we did e-discovery. There's a lot of things at play. But it was sort of like, well, wait. But the biggest, most pervasive problem that we actually have some great technology around is advanced threat protection for email. And this was like, we make email safer for business, became the tag. We focused on that ICP, like CISOs and security buyers, and we simplified so we could scale. And that growth dramatically accelerated. Now, our timing was great because, for a while, it was pretty much us and Proofpoint, one other player that could really defend against that kind of attack,
Mhm.
against that malware attachments and embedded links and things that are pretty commonplace now. But most of the other players couldn't handle that. And so by focusing on it, dialing in, it just unlocked a whole different level of growth. And we went public and we had 16 quarters of beat and raise once we were public. It was a thrilling experience and just thrilling to be a part of that whole company and that team.
So under your umbrella, those marketing, sales, and services. So when you came in, were you like, wait, we need to narrow the lens, focus on this more email special technology that we have that's a highly defensible type of product, and then what was your go-to-market strategy to scale revenue at that point, like inside sales and A's, BDRs, and global sales everywhere, marketing
Yeah.
services?
So, it's funny, the minute you narrow what you're solving for and your ICP is more specific, it allows a lot of ancillary work and frustration to just disappear. Even just the onboarding of a sales rep, when it's like, we sell this solution, you're going to be up against these two players. Here is quantified proof of how we do it. This is exactly how you run a POC. This is exactly the kind of objection handling you need to have down pat. These are examples for each of these industries. You can make them great at that, at solving for and answering and supporting. You can make then your services people great at implementing rapidly and getting people onto that platform and getting configuration right quickly. You can build brand that people, it's credible, that they trust and see it, and then they start, they see it again and again. And so when you're trying to do too many things, you can't be great at any of them. And so that was a good example of that. So yes, we went from, I think we had 70 something quota bearing reps, and then we went to hundreds, and we were been in a handful of countries. We went to many countries, and because you can't scale complexity, but you can take something really tight that's done well, and that you can grow and expand. And so, so a lot of it was get the story right, get more structured. We did have a mix of new leaders and that we brought in that brought folks like Dino DiMarino came from RSA. He's now running a startup, as a cyber company here in the Boston area. But and he brought some folks that brought that more of that talent from that industry. Once we said we're all about the CISO and all about that cyber risk, then we would hire a lot more from that industry, people that had those relationships, had those connections, had that credibility. Our storytelling became about that. So it was that became something to galvanize around. And then we could just get rigorous in our operations, because we didn't have to worry about running out of TAM or finding another TAM or adding another product. It was like, be great at this one. This is pervasive and it's acute, and there's no reason to distract ourselves with anything else.
And there's demand. People actually are spending money. There's budget for this.
Yes. And it's competitive as hell. I mean, like, there's
Mhm.
Microsoft, there's Proofpoint, there's a bunch of like kind of once great Barracudas and these kind of players.
Mhm.
But to your point, I mean, there was demand. People were going to buy one, they're going to buy us or them. Somebody was going to win that bid. And you just had to show them how ours was better, faster, cheaper.
All right, Quickbase. So what is Quickbase?
Yeah, Quickbase, we've evolved Quickbase quite a bit. I mean, originally, it started out with the premise, which is still at the core of what we do, is the world's being written and eaten by software, whatever Andreessen once said. But there's like 1% of the world that knew how to write software. So our genesis was, let's create an environment that non-developers can write software to run mostly internal applications within companies. So you wouldn't use us to build a gaming platform to sell to consumers, but we're used by 11,000 enterprises, mid-market enterprises, to help run their operations, to track everything from sort of their fleets to their field personnel to, their big projects to, just manage their business to be more efficient, to be more effective. And so, and the great thing is, most of the people building our platform, I mean, the vast majority, 80% plus, aren't developers. They're just people that work in our visual environment, and they're building, enterprise grade full stack applications in a very sort of visually rich environment.
But when you had initially joined the company, you did have to also come in and narrow down the ideal customer profile for Quickbase too, right?
Thanks for the question. It's an exciting space, but broad horizontal, competing in a broad horizontal way against the likes of ServiceNow and Monday and Asana and Microsoft and their Power Apps. I mean, that is a really powerful group of competitors, and they're telling big, broad stories. And so we said, where we use most often, where do we find ourselves winning just organically? And let's look at our customer base. Let's look at where we win the most. Let's look at where we have the best retention and expansion, et cetera. What we realized was that a lot of the underserved industries around construction and industrial manufacturing and mid-market manufacturers and people that are in the big field service teams, that big service organizations that did like sort of installations and oil and gas, maintenance in the field, and people that support the utilities and support the telecom companies. Most of how they run their operations is pretty custom. It's unique. That's what makes how they bid a project at a construction company is how they win. How a small firm that supports telecom manages the safety of their people in the field is how they have such a high safety record. And they don't want to give that up. They don't want to do a generic point solution approach. It's so fundamentally, these are areas where no code and custom software just makes sense. And so we realized that's a place for us to play. And so we leaned in there, and we don't see some of those mega competitors because they focus on, everybody loves financial services because the budgets are big, and they love insurance. They love big healthcare. We're fine to live and breathe in this sort of mid-market world that gets underserved by these guys. And also we just have a value, like sort of cost value trade-off that I think is attractive to them. So that's where we've had organic success. And so we're just more formalizing that in our storytelling, formalizing that in who our sales teams go after and who we support as a target market.
What about working at Quickbase? Like, what's the culture like? The day-to-day environment like?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we have a couple of values, and normally these things, I mean, and I hate to say this because they usually they come from the top, but sometimes they can feel a little hokey. You see these posters up and you're like, the one that's so authentic though, that we say is we win together. That is, of all environments I've been in, and people say this that just arrive here, is there's just this sense of support for when you ask. Like if you say like I messed something up, you've got 3 people that are like, let's figure it out together. Like if you say I don't know how this works, can you show me how this? People lean in to help. Like we do a monthly town hall, and there's the most excitement every month is when we share different awards for different folks who've made, either product releases and new and things that we've done there, or awards around sort of new sales that were closed. Like people love to see each other succeed. And that can be rare, like we talk about high trust, high performance. I've been in both in my environment. Rarely do you see them both working together? You see high performing environments that are intense and borderline toxic. We've all been at one of those. And we've all been at the opposite, like really nice and pleasant environments, lots of benefits, but maybe aren't as driven for accountability and success. Like there's sort of been, I think we both probably experienced both. When you get both together, where it's like, no, we're here to win, and we're fighting hard to win, and I'm going to give you support, but I'm also going to call you out when like you said you were going to do this and you didn't. And so that balance of trust and performance is hard, and I think we strive for that. I think that's a big part of who we are.
What are the plans looking ahead in terms of, hiring, what functional areas?
We continue to expand, kind of across the board. We've got a lot going on though, in terms of just continuing to grow a lot of our go to market function, in terms of sales, marketing, people that can help us in these different markets, understand those customers better. We've had a lot of great work, with our customer success organization, and just really realizing, listen, growth and expansion comes through them being successful. And so, the last year, the biggest group of new hires were our customer success organization. And we have a great new leader. Kelly's been on for about a year, and just really saying like, hey, the foundation of this business is keep the 11,000 customers we have, keep them growing, keep them successful. And I think this is probably true for most SaaS. Failure to launch is our biggest reason for churn. If we don't get them to land well and get to build, we have this metric, 3 apps and connect to a data source, that customer is going to love us for life. If we don't get them there, and we don't always, because different things come up, different priorities, it was harder than they thought, we didn't embrace them in the way they needed to be embraced, then we will lose that customer. And so that urgency of get in there right away, don't let the ink dry on the contract. Make sure they understand how the platform works. Help them build that first app. If you need to do whatever to get them through that rubric, then they're going to be a great customer for a long time, and they'll expand and they'll find other use cases. And so she's really helping us lean in on that specifically, make it easier to get them successful fast.
And as an extension of that, you run a very, I think most companies would be very envious, because companies would love to build a successful customer community. So you call that Crew,
Yeah.
QREW, which it seems very active. It's like some people are like, oh, we need community, and it's like crickets. But it seems like the exact opposite. When you talk about one organization having 14,000 applications on your platform, I can see why.
Yeah, it is. And there's an expression my first real interaction with our customers was that a month after I started, I had a couple one-off conversations, but it was online, virtual at the time, but our Empower is the name of our user event. And we run 2 a year, one physical, one virtual. And people they are in love with this platform. They built their careers in this platform. A third of our new opportunities come from former builders and users on this platform. They just take us from company to company as their career evolves, or division to division if they stay within a mid-sized or larger organization. And so anything we can do to help them, because they give us tons of feedback. Feedback's a gift. Sometimes it hurts, but it always makes you better. And they've been with us, for a long time, a lot of our users. And so we try to celebrate them. We try to help them, share what they've learned about how to get the most of building with Quickbase. And ironically, a lot of them end up here, in different functions, our services organization, our product management organization. They kind of are all in and big fans of Quickbase. And so we're always thrilled when that happens.
All right, well, I want to shift over to some career advice now. So, you held multiple roles in, VP, C-level, we talked about biz dev partnerships, marketing, COO, CEO. So For people that are looking to build a career towards that CEO position, what advice would you have?
Yeah. It was funny. I'd say, and I've thought about this, and even sort of have reflected on this because, and even did a piece of like 5 things I wish I knew before I had this job that no one told me, where I learned bits and pieces. And so I'll reflect on some of that. Like, and it's funny lately, it's a couple things that I think I've learned need to be modified slightly. Like transparency is huge, like genuinely, like trust is built because people believe what you say to be true and you show it to be, and you do what you say you're going to do. So that is without question. The thing that I've had to learn that's a slight addition to that is it has to be a two-way street, meaning like it's not just that you're broadcasting constantly, but that like stuff, good and bad, is coming back the other way. You're actually hearing what's happening. You're hearing what's working and what's not. And you're open to feedback, but then others are open to feedback. So that transparency, one way is broadcasting. Transparency, two ways is communicating. I mean, it's where really it happens. And as I was earlier in my leadership career, it was hard to ask hard questions, or it was hard to give hard feedback, but you were willing to take it and realize, hey, it's both. It's both. It's receiving and it's giving, and because they're going to be better for it. You're going to be better when you hear hard things from customers or hard things from the field teams, and that, I think that two-way street on transparency is a big one. Is a big one. Um, I'd say that's a good one. I'd say uh, maybe the same thing. There's a lot of talk of vulnerability, and I think vulnerability is powerful to admit when you don't know, or admit when you need help, or when you need to get different perspectives and things like that. Or I think that's good in all levels because I think that makes you credible. I mean, it makes you like someone that people want to believe. Like, okay, they're open. If they're willing to admit they don't know something and they need help or they're asked, that's great. I also think it's balanced because people still want to know where you're going. They still want to know there's a path and a vision. And sometimes that's always the hardest because you don't want to mislead, but you've got to set a vision and you don't know how it's going to turn out.
Now, you've hired a lot of executives going back to our earlier conversation of being the conductor of the orchestra. Different stages of business can require different skill sets. So, like, what tips do you have upon, hiring executives for your team?
Mm. Um, yeah, this is a good one. And probably one where I feel like I've been luckiest and had some of my biggest breakthroughs because of the caliber of the teams, but also probably where we all make our biggest mistakes because it's so hard to really know. And I don't think it's funny. There's like hiring, but that's just the beginning. I mean, that's generally the beginning, and there's so much effort. I don't know if people know how much effort really goes into developing others, like daily effort and partnering with them and like bringing back and highlighting, and the time to document, and the time to really engage with them at different levels of issues that are working and things that aren't working. And so and it, for me and for here in particular, I think this is really true at Quickbase, was partnering with a CPO that really, like, I probably, sometimes people spend all their time as a CEO with their CFO, or all the times with their chief product, or engineering, CTO. I spent a ton of time with Sherry Cotman. She's outstanding in terms of helping build this core ELT, being totally candid, like, hey, listen, that meeting did not work. And, like, how could we make that better? Or, hey, we have a conflict between these folks. You can't let that fester. Like, just as a constant partner and reminder of and opportunities for leadership development. That's probably another pattern when we talked. Like, it's not just the ELT, but it's the frontline managers that make or break the scaling of a business. I mean, I genuinely believe that. Not more than, but at least as much as a strong ELT, because things don't flow up and down. Like, you don't really know what's going on and what's working if that kind of feedback's not coming up. And vice versa. You can have a strategy and a vision and a direction, but if the middle management doesn't support it, they're not on board, they don't think it's the right, and they don't disseminate, they don't make it happen, it won't. Like, that's where the rubber meets the road. And so there's a ton of time that we spend with that team, developing that team, formal and informal leadership, mentoring with that team. That is the make or break, I think, of all these opportunities. Again, especially as you're starting to scale, because you can't see it all every day as a CEO. You're several layers removed from some of where the real decisions get made, where the real customer interactions happen, where the real tough choices around product directions get made. And so it really comes down to that frontline team. And it's like, I can't state the importance of that more enough.
All right, 3 apps you can't live without.
Okay. The one I'm kind of obsessed with, like we use ChatGPT, we use all that stuff. The image recognition on Google Gemini on the phone is kind of shockingly good. So even as something as simple as, take a picture of a building and say, what kind of architecture is that? Or take a picture of, I had a flashing light on the hood on this new stove that we just put in. Why is this flashing? That's all I asked with the picture. It identified the unit, identified why it was flashing, gave me the procedural steps because it needed a filter change. Like, the text-based stuff is amazing.
That is insane.
The image-based stuff. And so then now we have a mobile application. Well, we've had it for a while, but a field mobile application, and it's AI insights right off. They can take a technician can take a picture of equipment and say, like, help me troubleshoot this, to identify the equipment. Keith, it's outrageous. So that one is probably the one that almost, what I do see that leading to is you see these announcements from Meta, you see the announcements from Google, you see the Anthropic, like it moves to the glasses. I know they've been a lot of fits and starts with augmented reality, assisted reality, all this stuff, XR. There's that much intelligence now in the image recognition that if you did have them in some form factor like this, I think this is a game changer for so many of these field people that we support.
1,000%. No, it's insane how quickly everything is adopting. So, 2 others.
Where do I spend my time? Yeah, well, it's funny. I guess Slack's kind of replaced email as my time sink, just in terms of the company and interacting with folks and stuff like that. I'm not the sophisticated user. It's still basically like email, like, in private email for me, but that's a big one. What would be another one? Okay. So this is going to be boring, but it's one that we use Salesforce, like probably so many people. I never look at Salesforce. I never log into Salesforce. We live in Gong. So the reason we live in Gong and dashboard in Gong and forecast in Gong and everything is all of our phone conversations, all of our email interactions are being interpreted. And that's how, we also manually forecast, but triangulated against what Gong tells us. We do MEDPIC scoring manually, but also MEDPIC is a qualification methodology for sales. We use what Gong rates and scores that. It is such a powerful tool for all layers of sales management, executive management to see what's really going on. And even for product, then you can start to dig into, like, are customers frustrated with this? Or, hey, find customers that have had this product and what's their experience with it. And so now all the CX team and sales team use it, and all of that knowledge that's embedded there. That's where so many of our meetings center around. That is outrageous.
That's not boring at all. That's like it's come up a few times now, and what Gong has done with that platform is pretty amazing. And to hear someone like you, how you're spending your time in it it makes a lot of sense. So what they've done is pretty cool. Well, Ed, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story, obviously all the great work you've done at these companies throughout your history, and obviously all the great work the team is up to at Quickbase. It's a very meaningful company to the Boston tech ecosystem. So thanks for all the advice.
Great, cool. Well, listen, Keith, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Love the conversation, and we'll talk again.